Welcome to CISO Conversations, EU Data Regulations. I'm your host, Kev Johnson. If you, like so many IT and security leaders out there, are seeking ways to navigate the new EU data regulations, you've come to the right place. We're serving you insights and best practices from leading experts on data security on how the rollout of multiple data regulations within the EU is putting everyone's minds to the test. Today, we've invited Field CISO Richard Cassidy and Madeline Bennett, Technology Journalist and Writer, into the studio to give you a breakdown of what businesses and IT leaders must understand about the latest updates around the NIS2 EU Directive and how this regulation is already branching out outside EU member countries. We'll keep today's episode short, sweet and to the point, but make sure you look out for the brain twister from today's episode and flip your ears forward when Richard shares why organisations don't necessarily have to stress that much about NIS2. Enjoy.
Hello and thanks for joining us today. I'm Madeline Bennett, Technology Journalist and Commentator and your host for today's discussion. I'm joined by Richard Cassidy, Rubrik CISO, and we'll be discussing how to improve your cybersecurity ahead of the introduction of the European Commission's NIS2 Network and Information Security Directive. Cybercriminals only have to get lucky once to infiltrate and interfere with an organisation's most valuable assets, their data. This means businesses have to be one step ahead to ensure the best possible defence against any potential attack. Governments, regulatory bodies and wider industry are coming together to collectively assist through best practice and regulation like NIS2. The deadline for member states to transpose the NIS2 directive into national law is 17th of October 2024. And the UK government has already confirmed it's moving forward with its own plans to update its cybersecurity regulations as well. With so much to consider, digest and do, in this webinar, we'll be offering advice and guidance on how to prepare and meet your obligations under forthcoming cybersecurity rules. So thanks very much, Richard, for joining us today. Can you give us an overview of Rubrik and your role there?
Madeline, pleasure to be a part of the event, and thank you as well to everybody that's spending the valuable time watching and listening to what we have to say. So thank you for the introduction. I am Richard Cassidy, CISO at Rubrik for EMEA. Essentially, my role in the industry and in Rubrik is to help demystify a lot of the complexities around data security and cybersecurity. I'm focusing a lot at the moment on the cybersecurity frameworks, NIS2 being one of them, for example, which we'll talk about in the rest of this webinar. But also making the bridging the gap, if you like, between how we can get better at fighting the adversary in our day-to-day operations, and also how to use technologies that we have better in our existing environments, right? It isn't always about the new and latest shiny tool sets and toys. It's about doing things much more logically, much more effectively with what we have. So in a nutshell, my role is to help bring the value of what Rubrik does to organizations, but also to help organizations extract way more capabilities and a comprehensive security outcome from their existing tool sets and bring the two together essentially.
So, Richard, I'm now going to hand over to you to talk us through what companies need to know about NIS2. Is there a rush for organisations to start complying now? Is it something where, what would you say is the best time for them to start their planning?
The time is now. And I mean, let's be realistic. Is NIS2 a forklift overhaul of your entire cybersecurity, cyber resilience strategy? The good news is it's not. However, having said that, if you fall within the NIS2 framework as an organization, right? So whether you're not seen as NIS essential, NIS critical, NIS important, based upon their nomenclature, then you've got till October next year to reach compliance. And if you haven't reached compliance by then you're not going to be able to transact in this particular framework. So yes, there is a rush to kind of get there, and you really should be thinking about doing that as soon as you possibly can. But I think on the good side of the fence, at least from my experience over the NIS2 conversations I've been having over the last quarter, a lot of organizations have a lot of the core capabilities already in-house. They've just got to amend their policies, processes to fall more in line with what NIS2 are looking for, and maybe add a few additional tool sets to kind of provide the coverage they're going to need. So yeah, hopefully that helps as an answer.
Yes, it does. And what should companies do if they lack the internal expertise to fully understand and adhere to the new directive?
Yeah, so the good news is there are certainly a large number of organizations, third-party providers, as they'll be referred to by NIS2, that are helping organizations get into compliance with this regulations, for example. Now, the good news is NIS2 are putting a lot of onus on those organizations to do their job very well, and they will be assessed also under the framework to make sure what they're delivering to an organization that uses third parties to gain compliance is indeed what it should be and at the level of comprehensiveness that's required. So my advice is there always has to be a gap analysis, and most organizations may have the ability to do that. If not, there are a lot of capabilities in dedicated third-party service providers to provide this capability, and I would go down that path if you haven't got it in-house. And as I said, I think you'll find off the back of that there's not a great deal of gaps that you're going to need to fill. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. And you mentioned in your presentation, you compared NIS2 to some existing regulations. Can you just summarise again for us how NIS2 fits in with any existing or planned cybersecurity legislation, particularly of note to UK firms?
Yeah, so again, the UK no longer being part of the EU means that there's a lot of UK specific regulations that you're going to have to tick box exercises on. And I don't mean it so flippantly as I just said. We do see these as tick box exercises, but actually a lot of them are very relevant in terms of controls and resilience kind of functionality. So what we see, at least in terms of DORA, is the real overlap is on digital operational resilience. I know DORA stands for Digital Operations Resilience Act, but the operational resilience aspect of DORA maps very nicely into the NIS2 framework around the cyber resilience capabilities. So you'll find that if you went down the DORA path, you're going to have already met a lot of the requirements around NIS2. But even if you follow your own security frameworks, NIST is another example, NIS2, just for clarity, not NIS2. A lot of the controls in NIST, whether you adhere to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, there's so many out there. You'll find there's a lot of crossover on the technical functionality, which is a big part of what NIS2 Directive is focused on. So I don't have a specific answer in that. If you are following the existing frameworks really well and you're aligning very nicely to them, you're going to find you probably will have a lot of coverage already around NIS2. So that's not a bad place to start from, in my opinion, and hopefully will bring some good news to the listeners and watchers of the webinar.
Right. And I've just got a couple of more questions of my own before I start taking some more questions from the audience. And just a reminder that please, if you have any questions for Richard, please post them into the box on your screen. So, Richard, I wanted to ask, what other advice would you give companies who are under enough pressure as it is and really don't need yet another project to add to their list of things to do?
Yeah, I mean, this is a board level initiative here. The challenge with NIS2, with the others as well, as I mentioned, you're going to have to comply. You're going to have to align with these directives, with these legislations. So the board really needs to sit up and take notes, and they need to look at the existing projects over the next 12 to 18 months and align in these directives and frameworks, or else they're going to find themselves in a position where they can't transact with businesses in the EU, and that's not a place any organisation wants to be in. So, although it is another project, so to speak, it's a real critical one, and there needs to be a start on this pretty much straight away. Having said that, again, if you look at a lot of the projects that are already in flow, there's a real shift in focus today for organizations making sure that they have the ability to rebuild from the ground up, their entire business operations in the event of a major failure or a DR scenario. Those capabilities cover a lot of the articles in the NIS2 framework. We're seeing a lot of organizations focus on machine learning technologies, in analytics capabilities around user behavior, access to critical assets and infrastructure. Again, these all fall into the NIS2 framework. So you're going to find in your gap analysis, which you must do as soon as you possibly can, that maybe a lot of the projects you're already focusing on delivering will give you a great deal of coverage around NIS2 and even the other frameworks we mentioned here in this webinar. So yes, it's another project, but I think the good takeaway should be that you may find a lot of your existing projects are going to give you a lot of coverage. And where there are gaps, well, I think you'll find they'll be very easy to fill, and a lot will be more process focused as you kind of lift the lid on what you're not doing and the gaps that you're going to have to fill essentially.
Thanks. And before we move on to audience questions, is there anything else you wanted to add on this topic, either around cybersecurity in general or the directive specifically?
Yeah, I think if we go back to the kind of 5 key pillars of NIS2, right? Security requirements, most organizations, if not all, at least the ones I've been talking with today, have a very well-oiled ecosystem around how they manage security requirements, okay? And that's from initial incident notification right through to handling and even information sharing amongst peer organizations. So if you think about what you're doing today, like I said, please don't listen to this webinar, look at NIS2 and think, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to put on hold everything I'm possibly thinking of doing in the next 12 months. You're going to find that actually you probably need a lot of the article needs straight out of the gates. So the security requirements is one that a lot of organizations will have a large degree of maturity in. Incident handling also, whether you're doing it internally or whether you're outsourcing it, is something that we've been doing for a very long time. And again, you should find as an organization, you'll have good coverage here. There will be tweaks, naturally in how you're going to do things from a NIS2 perspective. But as I said, you're going to find you'll have potentially a lot of the maturity you're going to need. Now, continuity of service is where you're probably going to focus more of your time. I don't see a lot of organizations have a strong resilience capability. A lot of organizations are really just thinking about things in a legacy way. I back up my data, so therefore I have resilience, or my cloud service provider gives me the outcomes I need because their services are always available, right? SaaS or, whatever it may be. And that's not always the answer, right? True disaster recovery isn't just about putting the onus on your service providers. It's about testing and building your own operation resilience recovery plan. Now, the final 2, monitoring, auditing, and testing, and then compliance with international standards. Again, that's just going to be the part where we need to focus on how we get the data, where we get the data from that falls into these pillars, how we can share that data effectively in the way that NIS2 provides. So the takeaway is, please understand you may already tick a lot of the requirements already today. And those that you don't have, I guarantee with the right gap analysis and the right partnerships with technology and service provider vendors, you're going to find that you'll be able to meet the requirements relatively easily.
Thank you very much. And thanks to our audience for all the great questions so far. Please do keep them coming in as we're coming to the final stages of this presentation. I'm sure that if we don't get round to answering your particular question this morning, that Richard will be happy to follow up on those. So first question from the audience. Adhering to this new directive sounds very expensive. What's the cost of not complying? Are there any fines?
Indeed. So with every regulation comes the risk of penalties should you not meet any of the needs or the requirements. So there's a couple to be aware of. So for all essential organizations in the NIS2 directive, we're looking at 2% of worldwide annual turnover of the preceding financial year, okay? And NIS2 are mandating whichever is higher, okay? And what I mean by higher is it's got to be at least a 10 million euro fine for essential organizations. Now, the others, which were referred to as important, they've got a maximum liability of 7 million euro, or what we call at least 1.4% of total worldwide annual turnover. So look, I don't know many organizations that would need to spend anywhere near that amount to get into NIS2 compliance capabilities. So the obvious takeaway is you'll be spending a lot more in fines if you fall foul of the rules that they're enforcing than you will be in getting compliant from a technology and process perspective.
Okay, yeah, that's some hefty fines there, and so I'm sure our audience and companies in general will be keen to start preparing to avoid the potential. And I think this is a good question from the audience next. Then it feels like there's a lot to do, and in reality, not much time to do it. How would you advise us to prioritise?
Yeah. Again, and that's going to be the question in everybody's minds and at the lips of the board meetings and IT and compliance executive meetings, right? So 3 key points for me. First is determine if you fall under the NIS2 scope, right? And which units of your business are impacted, because it may not be all. So that's the first thing. And the second point is evaluate the security measures that you already have, and then amend those security measures and policies to plan for NIS2 compliance. Like I said earlier, you may find you already have a lot of the capabilities in-house, and more likely than not, you will have. So please understand that with just this very simple evaluation of measures, you're probably going to find you're almost all of the way there. And if not, there's not going to be a great sort of runway to travel to get to where you need to be. And then quite simply implement those measures, right? And the incident reporting obligations from a supply chain perspective are the ones that you're going to really need to start early to avoid any delays in alignment. I know that's a very generic statement, but I really would hyper focus on that sort of third party supply chain side of NIS2, because that's the bit that we typically as organizations maybe haven't focused enough on in terms of security and policy controls, at least in my experience from breach investigations.
Thank you. And quite an interesting question here. Will the NIS2 directive be a competitive advantage for companies, or is it just insurance against cybersecurity damage?
That's a great question. Look, from my perspective, if you again looking at what NIS2 is mandating that organizations fall in alignment to, yeah, there'll be a huge competitive advantage to organizations that are able to align to this, and more around the core data protection, resiliency side of things, right? The continuity of service. A lot of businesses think, in my experience, in terms of breach and breach response as a siloed event, right? These things happen. We must deal with these things as they come along. What we're not thinking of enough as an industry is the ability to essentially recover everything from the worst possible case scenario and test that recovery capability. And so within NIS2 and the continuity of service pillar, there's a lot of focus on the cyber resilience, the recovery point objectives, secure recovery validation. These are all very, very core functional aspects that any business should have to be able to keep the lights on, as it were, even in the darkest sort of breach scenarios. So absolutely there'll be competitive advantage because you'll be able to maintain operations even in the worst case scenario of a significant breach, malware, ransomware, whatever it may be.
Thank you. And another question here. Where can I find more information about the NIS2 directive? So I want to hear, Richard, is there somewhere on the Rubrik site that you can point people to, or it's a useful guide that they could access?
Yeah, so we are posting, every week new material around NIS2 and the other legislations that we're helping customers align to. So if you go to our main website and look at the articles, specifically search around DORA, NIS2, for example, you'll find the data you need. I would say, however, the NIS2 directive website, NIS-2-directive.com, is actually very well laid out with a wealth of really relevant and practical information on what you need to be thinking about to align to NIS2. So both of those resources I would go to, and I think you'll find on a wider search, there's also some very good data out there in the general marketplace too.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that, Richard. And thank you, everybody, for your questions. And as I say, any that haven't been answered today, we'll get those passed over to Richard for follow-ups. So that was really useful, Richard. And it really seems that my takeaways from this is that it really seems that now is the time to act for companies in terms of updating their security processes, not only to get ahead of incoming regulations like NIS2, but for the best of the organisation, the customers and partners, to protect against the raft of potential cyber attacks. Can you share your 3 key takeaways from this session today? Yeah,
absolutely. Number 1 is start yesterday in making sure you're working to NIS2 alignment, and that start yesterday mantra starts with: are you one of the organizations affected or implicated in the NIS2 framework and legislation requirements? So obvious points. But the second is take a breather, right? Remember, as a business, you might have been running for years or decades. you'll have built, either through your own in-house capabilities or third-party services, a very comprehensive cybersecurity capability and a reasonably or very comprehensive cyber resilience capability. So just do a gap analysis of what you have today, what you don't have. And I think you might be pleasantly surprised that there isn't a great deal of stress on your plate in you bridging those gaps. And the third point is, remember, NIS2 is there to help you as an organization become much more enabled in the current threat landscape. So please see it as a positive. It really is. I've been in this industry for 23 years now. I've seen legislations come and go, and others still stay and get improved. And NIS2 is one of the best yet. And I say that, and I'm happy to be challenged on it, in giving customers and organizations functional benefit from aligning to a framework of almost any I've seen out of the EU in the past decade or so. So it's a positive step. Take a deep breath and start this process as soon as you possibly can.
Well, thanks so much for that, Richard, and for your time today. As I say, I think a ton of really helpful advice there for companies wanting to get ahead of the NIS2 directive. And thanks to all of you, the viewers, for joining us.
All right, that wraps up today's episode of CISO Conversations EU Data Regulations. For more insights on navigating data regulations, join us next time as Anu Bradford and Bronwyn Boyle join Richard Cassidy to explore the importance of resilience and regulatory compliance as critical factors for organisations to manage their cyber threats and bolster cyber defence. Rubrik is on a mission to secure the world's data. We help organisations uphold data integrity, deliver data availability that withstands adverse conditions, continuously monitor data risks and threats, and recover their data when they're attacked. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. See you next time.